Our last speaker is Debbie Miller, who is the educator for Beth Shalom, and she's held that position for the last 5 years. Microphones here. She runs the Hebrew school for our children and also runs an adult education program which includes Hebrew language studies as well as Jewish studies. Debbie lived in Israel for 18 years and studied there. She's originally from the USA, is married with 4 children, and she's a keen activist for the environment, and we are very aware of that, all of us here who belong here. She keeps us on our toes, and she also ran a Jewish Sustainability Leadership Training Seminar a couple of years ago for young adults on Waiheke Island that was a huge success. So, Debbie.
I want to see what I've got up here on the board. So I want to just say, to begin with, that when Jews talk about a topic, they always go back to the original source. And the original source for us is the Torah. And the Torah for us has a basic premise, or the way we live our lives, is an obsession with justice, the pursuit of justice, and to bring holiness into our lives. So from that point of view, I'm going to use the Torah study that we have here to find out what it says in the text and what the rabbis and our Jewish scholars have extrapolated through history as to the way, the guidelines by which we're supposed to deal with the environment, because it's all there. It's been there for centuries. But as you pointed out in Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 28, is probably the most problematic text that we can find in the Torah. And it says, V'kishvu v'yirdu, subdue and rule over. But yirdu literally means to come down on and to subjugate. And that is extremely problematic, because from that, throughout the generations, people have taken the idea that the Bible is telling us that the resources that are there for us to utilize as we choose. But if we go to the next chapter, in chapter 2, in verse 15, you get to another section which says that the last line there, U lishamra. Now the Lord took the man and he placed him in the Garden of Eden, paradise, okay? And you're supposed to work it and to guard it. But the word lishamra is a word only used 3 other times in the Bible. And lishamra is used in Deuteronomy, and it means that you are an insurer. It's used that you're supposed to guard something. So in other words, I lend you my car, okay? You use it, and you have to return it in the exact same condition you got it in. In other words, you do not have ownership. You are a guardian of that car. You can utilize it. You can develop things with it. You can go around the world in it. But when you return it to me, it better be in the same condition you took it out in. And so Lishamra is telling us the guideline by which we are allowed to, and it's not to push down and use as we will, but it is the way we are allowed to, it's a guideline the way we are allowed to use those resources. We do not own the earth. We are not owners. We are insurers. We are people who are allowed to utilize it, and when we get done with it and we return it to the owner, and guess who the owner is? Hashem, God. And so when we return it to the owner, it better be in the same condition we started out with it. And the reality is, that this concept of ownership and guardianship, which you mentioned earlier, is a vastly different concept. We are guardians. We are insurers of the earth. We are allowed to develop it and be responsible, but we are supposed to return it to the owner in the same viable condition. So, here we go. Then we go on, and it says, "And the Lord commanded man, saying, of every tree in the garden you may eat. Etz hagan ochel tochal." So you're allowed to eat of trees. Did it say you're allowed to eat of animals? No, no animals there. The ideal world we're supposed to live in, we are supposed to be eating the fruits and the vegetables. We are not supposed to be killing animals. That comes along 10 generations later in the time of Noah, the flood story, right? So then they say, okay, you're on the boat, you're stuck here, you need some food, it's a dire situation, you can eat meat. Okay? But then we get to Mount Sinai and we receive the Torah. God says, do the deed, and we say, yes, we'll do it. And what happens? He says, okay, you can eat meat because you've already had a taste of this really fine, steak, right? And so he says, I'm going to compromise. You can have steak, but you're only allowed to kill it a certain way. You have to have a consciousness that you're taking a life. You have to be sensitive to the animals of the earth. But ideally, in the 12th century, Maimonides, one of our greatest scholars, says, the ideal, the thing you're supposed to strive to be, is a vegetarian. We get it that you're a fallible human being. We get it that you still want to eat some meat. Okay, so do it kosher. But definitely, the ideal, don't have any illusions. You're supposed to be a vegetarian. And today, we know the proliferation of industrialized meat industry is responsible for some of the most dangerous and prolific greenhouse gases. And so I say, we are the weather. Saving the planet begins at breakfast. Next one. So I expect you to all be vegans tomorrow. No? How many of you are going vegan tomorrow? Okay. Jewish law of preserving the fruit tree. So I'm just going to go through different parts of the Torah and what it says and some of the things that directly relate. So there's a Jewish law that says we're not allowed to cut down a fruit tree even in time of war. In Judaism, the most important law is preserving human life. You're allowed to desecrate any of the Jewish laws in order to save a life, even cannibalism. And matter of fact, a rabbi in Argentina, when they had the airplane that was shot down in the mountains, anybody know that? And they were in the rabbi actually called the people up who, you're not allowed to kill the guy, but if somebody died, you're allowed to eat the meat in order to save a life. And he said, you did the right thing. Everybody else says it's gross what you did, that you were cannibals, but actually you saved a life. And that was the right thing. So this is a really strange comment, because it says even in war, in time of war, you are not allowed to cut down the fruit tree. And why does that pertain to pikuach nefesh? Because not only are you cutting down the tree to like make your fire and warm yourself up or make your instruments of war, but you are taking food out of the next generation's mouth. And it goes on further, and the rabbis say that the Mishkan, which is so we've creation, we went down in Egypt, we got there slaves, we came out, now we're in the desert, and the first thing God does is says, build the house to pray to God and sacrifice to God. And what would you say? Well, let's take the nicest wood. No. You only take wood of the acacia tree. Why? Because the acacia tree doesn't fruit. And you don't want to cut down a tree that would feed life. Life is sacred, saving a life. You're living in the desert. You aren't even for God's house. You're not allowed to cut down a fruit-bearing tree. Next one. Okay, so God created all of God's creations for the 5 days. After it, God says, and it was good, right? Oh, that's easy. The animals are good, the birds are good, the fishes are good, and the humans come along, and does he say we're good? No, we're not. We are up for grabs. You can choose to be good, or you can choose not to be good. It's in your hands. We are here to work in God's image. We are created in God's image, and we are to work in God's image. But you can make a choice, and you can make the wrong choice. And so whether you are good or not, it is in our hands. And so God's creative process is as if we are now, I wouldn't say the conduits. We aren't God, we are the conduits of God. And so therefore, that goodness is up for grabs, and we are to develop and cultivate the earth by the sweat of our brow. However, when we motzi, when we take out bread from the earth, which is the blessing we say over the bread, which is considered our main meal, when we motzi lechem min haaretz, it is good and it's in our hands. So cultivation is important, changing what we've been given. We are no longer just picking the fruit off the tree. We're actually transforming it and making it into something different and better, bread. But that process can be good if it's in our hands with the right intent and it's not wasteful. In Judaism, we have a thing called Midrash. You can take these stories, and the rabbis come along and they say, let's make up a little story so you understand it a little bit better. And so this is a Midrash. It's not actually written in the Bible or in the Talmud or the Jewish canon of law. It's a story. When God created Adam, he led him around the garden. Behold my works! For your sake did I create it. See to it that you do not spoil or destroy it, for if you destroy it, there will be no one to repair it after you. And that's my message. You know, if we do think that we can utilize this stuff that's been given to us by God, and that we can just use it and walk away, there will be nothing after us. So, the Torah is a license to develop. The Torah, the Jewish book of laws from which our system stems, which is those 5 books of Moses, is not a finished product. It's a guideline. It's a series of laws. We have to figure it out. We have to work with God's creation. We have to develop it. Nature is beautiful. Science and knowledge are incredible. But God gave us this knowledge did not give it to us as a license to destroy. It's a license to improve and develop. Motzi lechem, to take bread, transformative action out of the earth and make it into something better. So the last, and this is probably the clearest directive that's given by the Talmud, which is the body of laws that the rabbis took out of the Torah, and it's called Bal Tashchit. Bal Tashchit, obviously I made little signs there for you all to see so you know. It says that wanton wasting of anything of value at any time is prohibited by laws of Bal Tashchit. So in other words, if you waste anything, it's a transgression of this Bal Tashchit law that we are all required to observe. So food, fuel, paper, energy, and water, these are resources that we often use very casually and wastefully, and they're priced inexpensively, encouraging wasteful consumption. So I think you should all start treating them like gold, and we should price them like gold, because gold actually, we don't really need it. It doesn't have any purpose, frankly speaking. But food, fuel, paper, energy, and water, should be priced at the price as the most valuable things on earth, and then people might treat it a bit differently. It's casually priced, it's very problematic, and Baal Tashchit says that the consumption of those things should be dealt with as if they are the most expensive things on earth. And the law says one is forbidden from wasting them. And if you think that there's nothing you can do, all you have to do is look here, over here in this list of food waste. What is the biggest thing on that pie chart? It's consumer wastage. It's 47%. So it starts in your house. I expect every piece of food that's on your plate to go to some use. Other Jewish laws which protect the environment are Shabbat, a day of rest not only for people, but for animals and land. We work 6 days, and on the 7th day we rest. In the time when Judaism came up with this law, it was the most revolutionary thing that ever hit the earth. Everybody worked 7 days a week because they were on the verge of starvation. It was a really different, we go to supermarkets today, we think, not a problem. You get your choice between, 20 different cheeses. It's not a question of whether there's enough food. There are people starving, but it's not in our personal reality, and so we don't have that kind of consciousness. But the day of rest is a day off from productivity. I think it's a powerful idea. And that's taken one step further when we go to Shemitah, which is every 7th year the land has to be left fallow. And then we go to the next step even, which is Yuval, which is every 50 years the land returns to the original owners. Now obviously this never took place, or the rabbis say it probably didn't take place, because frankly speaking, it would be incredibly problematic to run a society that way, because nobody would make any sales the last 5 years before the 50-year came back, because who wants to pay full price for something that you're going to have to return in 5 years, right? So banking-wise, it was a disaster. Not that they probably had banks then, but you get the basic idea. So, but the concept is really interesting, because it really takes home the idea that we don't personally own this land, that it's not ours to do with as we please. It returns to the original owner, and the original owner is God. Last one. So there's another thing, and it's called Levite Cities. Do you know who the Levites were? So there were the Kohanim, they were the priests, the next one down were the Levites. And when we came into the land of Israel, what they did was they had cities that were established. Originally, it were just agricultural people working the land, or goat herders. But they established these cities for the people who were taking care of the temple processes. So they weren't working the land. They were living in communities, okay? And these people, the Levite tribe, lived with their houses in the center and the temple, which they were taking care of the sacrifices. And outside of that was a band called a Midrash. Midrash literally means like a grassy area. But the Midrash, according to Rashi, who was one of the 5th century Jewish commentator, he says that the Midrash is an amenity for the beautification of the city, an open area with no buildings, no agriculture, just beauty and recreation area for enjoyment. And after that area, then surrounding it, you can have the agriculture, the industry of the day. In other words, every city surrounding the outside of the housing area and the outside of your security was an area that had no purpose. It wasn't going to make you any food. It wasn't going to defend you. It was just to enjoy God's gift to you, the beauty of the earth. And this Maimonides says in the 12th century teaches that it's not just for the Levite cities, it's for all cities. Every city, every place to keep its society sane needs to have a beautifying area surrounding them. And we know that when we test rats and animals and we put them in a deprived area, they lose control. And the same thing happens in our cities when we put people in really terrible circumstances with no nature around them. They resort to drugs and alcohol and all sorts of things because their life is devoid of meaning. And so it's really important to understand that this is a model for the way we're supposed to live in the earth. And then there's one more after this. The prophet Ezekiel, the prophet was shown a vision, and it's of a polluted ocean, fish and other marine life which are dying. And you're like, wow, this was back then they were talking about these visions? They must have been really able to see into the future. A small trickle of water from under the threshold of the temple, the water symbolizing the Torah or the Jewish law, grows to become a great stream and increases to become a shoreline of beautiful fruit trees. Notice fruit trees, okay? And when these waters finally reach the ocean, that ocean is healed and it is restored to health. Paradise, Gan Eden, we once had it and it can be restored. How? It will happen through the applications and teaching of Torah, which pursues justice, not just for humans, but for the planet. That's one. Spiritual leadership. We know what to do. The real problem is our selfishness, our greediness, and our laziness. We have a moral problem, a spiritual problem, not an intellectual problem. All the solutions for solving the earth's problems are in our hands today. We know what to do. It is not for lack of knowledge and ingenuity that we do not fix the earth. It is for our bankrupt morality and spirituality, which does not place a value on fixing our ways of waste and abuse of our planet. It is why a joint spiritual leadership, all of us here today, is one of the keys to saving our planet. Thank you.